Hello everyone. In this 11th chapter of the book Honest Work, it discusses how ethics plays a role in doing business with other countries and how interacting and adapting to an outside culture through respect, trustworthiness, and integration can bring a great success in a foreign business relationship. It also highlights some of the examples of some not so appropriate or legal actions some of the big companies have taken and how it drastically affected their image and their profits. The two main points that I want to focus on are how business establish and maintain an identity, especially when doing business with countries where it's almost a guarantee that you're going to run into some ethical clashes and some discrepancies and differences in your own culture. The other is from the theories of Confucius, and his words and insights in this chapter tell us why trust is so important and how it plays such a large role in choosing on who we do business with and how that relationship is going to be maintained. It's also important to honor and trust with those you do business because it generally is agreed upon in most cultures that trust is the highest form of respect. Confucius also shows us the ways to keep ourselves honest when it comes to trust and says to always use self-examination when analyzing issues or discrepancies with trust. I have a couple videos that complement the teachings brought up in the chapter also. And for the first video, it introduces an idea of intercultural sensitivity, which essentially gives a name to an idea of realizing other cultures and differences and your own duty as a business person to adapt, accept, and integrate appropriately. It gives typical examples and statements that any business individual might end up thinking when doing business in a foreign sector and how to ultimately transition from the pessimistic, stereotypical attitude to a more accepting and welcoming view of other businesses' cultures. The ethno-relative stage of the video offers the most valuable information in regards to accepting a diversified state of mind, which will ultimately help you do business globally. These steps to understand intercultural sensitivity can be a key part in the success of doing business with a different culture.
Acceptance of another's difference does not necessarily mean agreement with or even attempting to adopt those differences. People still have their individual tastes and preferences. Some may be appreciated, but not all cultures or cultural practices will be liked or valued by all people.
Even though people find that they may not necessarily agree with all they see practiced within another culture, they can at least understand what they witness. To really help this student learn, I'm going to have to change my approach.
I interact with my male and female colleagues somewhat differently to account for differences in the way respect is communicated.
I can maintain my values and also behave in culturally appropriate ways.
Adaptation is the stage during which people begin to see cultural categories as more flexible and become more competent in their ability to communicate across cultures.
It's important to realize that no one culture's ethics is any better than another's. It is almost impossible to say that the way one country does something is completely unethical when compared to your own beliefs. This is why it's important to honor and respect cultural differences. With that being said, yourself as a member of a company with its own unique identity and image, you are responsible of upholding that identity no matter where you go to do business. So, for instance, if engaging in foreign relationships strays far from the company's core values at home, then it may be thought should be given to forego that tie and do business elsewhere. I feel that's a pivotal misstep that most big businesses that encounter discrepancies make, where an American company, let's say, established with the laws and regulations in the U.S., end up doing business in a land that is foreign with less stringent laws and automatically adapts this way of business while still being seen as an American company. Having a split identity as a business that differs depending on what hemisphere a business may be doing business in brings rise to much of the controversy that's seen today. Moving on to the second video, it touches on how trustworthiness is so important in all arenas of doing business, and then it goes on to explain how human rights, also known as dignity by other cultures, encompasses the ideas of caring about workers' rights, respect for business partners, etc. Ethics in the workplace is also addressed by talking about whistleblowing, a topic that we heard in the last chapter, and how this form of accountability of relationships between businesses and its employees is being further embedded in customary business practices.
I'll say what is now being pushed even by the Chinese government is this rediscovery of Confucian values like trustworthiness, which is, I think, also a very down-to-earth value. If you want to become successful in business, you need to prove that you honor your promises. So it's a bit the contrary to when we are New York Kutzpah. We are the brightest, smartest guy in the world. No, you are more a bit low profile. But then what is credited if you really stick to your word. See? So there you can learn a lot. Also to be self-critical. I like that a lot from Confucianism. Just we tend sometimes just to put the blame on the others. Where Confucius said, just maybe look, maybe your Chinese is maybe still so poor that your partner misunderstood. Well, I think that's a very smart approach and actually very close to Judaism and Christianity.
I understand the government has come to emphasize a term called dignity, which is what we might call human rights, but they don't want to use that word because it's become politicized.
Yeah.
But they've started to use the term dignity, and it refers to some of the same topics that we would cover with human rights.
Right, that's a quite interesting debate in the last party congress, where the Prime Minister Wen Jiabao very much insisted on this term of dignity. And so here you also can learn a certain flexibility. Instead of insisting what we would say human rights, you could discover that actually, I would say almost all the main content of human rights, caring about workers' rights, caring that each one is respected and so on, this is in the Chinese Confucian tradition, put under dignity.
And how do we understand what seems to be juxtaposed with a number of repressive measures or measures against particular individuals, lawyers, or others in China recently? How do we understand that concurrent emphasis on dignity and yet other incidents that don't seem to the Westerner to represent that?
I think we could make a strong point that, not say based on Western values or Western obsessions, that this is wrong, but also based on these main ideas of dignity, not to allow that people could express their justified grievances would not be proper. I think that's an important point. That's not just we are obsessed with Western ideas, but
and so is that idea spreading in China today, that one ought to be able to voice their legitimate grievances?
Absolutely, we have that even in this law of whistleblowing, already in 1995, where employees are encouraged to voice their justified grievances.
Key takeaway points from these two videos include knowing how to properly respect the culture that the other business is in, because in doing so, you'll create a lasting relationship that will benefit you and your company for a long time. Also knowing your identity as a business and deciding whether respecting and adapting to different ideals in different countries will strain on your reputation as a company. Your company's image viewed around the world, whether that is worth the cost benefit to do business there. And lastly, knowing the importance of trustworthiness. A company acting upon the trust they have for their business cohorts is not nearly as important as gaining and maintaining that trust in the first place. And gaining that trust comes from first holding yourself or your company accountable above all else. I want to thank you for watching this video. Hopefully it was informative, and have a good day.